What happened in the GOP debate? Who won? Who lost? What were the important clashes? We'll get to all that and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through the internet and find the most outrageous takes and we talk about why they are good or bad. My name is Donald and I'm here with my co-host Britt. We're excited to get into a debate episode today, but before we get started, just want to remind you to follow and like and share and comment all the stuff that helps us out in the algorithm, makes a big difference to us. You can follow us at Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on YouTube and Twitter. Without further ado, we're going to do things a little bit differently today because the GOP primary debate, the first one of the season, happened yesterday as of recording. So we're going to go through and we found about 9 takes on the debate, which, you know, debates are not always the most deep, introspective events. And so the takes may be a little more shallow. So we got a bunch of them and we're just going to kind of popcorn run through them, talk about what's good or bad. So the first one comes from Matt Welsh. He's an editor at Reason magazine, pretty high up guy there. And he tweets, Vivek Ramaswamy successfully baited the GOP debate into being about him. As long as the GOP electorate remains fervently anti-normal politicians, his approach, not Chris Christie's, will be comparatively successful. What do you think about this take?
It's a very good take, and I think it speaks to how the debate went, and I think it speaks to also just how politics have been the past 5-6 years. The rise of the outsider. And I remember listening to Vivek, I think he was on Michael Malice's podcast. This is very early on in his initial run, and he was really hammering on being the outsider, and I thought, man, this is a little bit over the top, you know, and you haven't really proven that you are. You're just saying that you are, and it seemed a little bit derivative of Trump. But in retrospect, especially from the debate and Trump not being on the stage, like, it was a very good move. It's like, well, you know, Dave Smith talks about it, one of our favorite podcasters, that like Trump looked down at the ground, saw, you know, a pair of aces, and no one was picking up the cards. He's like, I'm just going to pick this up. I'm going to be the outsider that hates politicians because Congress has like a 13% approval rating. I'm going to ally myself with the people and go for it. And that's what Vivek has done really well. And he successfully made it that, like, he made it clear that he stood for the people and that he was trying to have like actual common sense stuff. And what was great is that he has no track record, right? And like that used to be like a detriment to your like to what you would do in politics, or if you were running, like people would call you out on that. You know, I can't remember who it was, but I'm not going to speak to my candidate's youth and inexperience or whatever.
Yeah. That was Reagan quote. Yeah.
Reagan. Yeah. So, you know, that used to be a detriment, but now because the American people have seen that, like, oh yeah, these people that have been in power for 50 plus years have not done a good job. Who are they to speak about experience being the main qualifier? So he's done a really good job, you know, shifting the conversation.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that really, if you're running for president, you have to be somewhat in the lane of being connected or being, I don't know what the word is. I wouldn't say totally compromised or sold out, but there's definitely an angle where you have to have made some deals to even be on that stage. And I do think that's true of Vivek a little bit. And a lot of people will point out, oh, he was pro mask wearing at first, and he has been generally pro vaccine. He switched his rhetoric on Trump from when Trump, you know, tried to sort of push against the election results, and he was really disappointed in that. And now he's all pro-Trump. And some of those critiques I will grant, right? Like, yeah, I wish he would have been more fervently anti-mask and more fervently against vaccine mandates. As far as I know, he never supported mask or vaccine mandates. And as far as I know, all of his rhetoric on Trump was more of, I'm disappointed that he's done this in a personal way, not legality. So he hasn't necessarily been the same level of double crossing. But what he has done successfully is he's chosen the lane that he's going to be in and how he wants to approach the politician stage as that outsider and making it about him, at least while Trump's not in the room. I think Matt's right in that. And the funny thing is, so yeah, sure, he used to be a little bit more, or not as pro-Trump maybe as he's appearing right now and all that kind of stuff. But every single one of those politicians on stage has flip-flopped on positions every single day of their lives. Like, let's not pretend that within the very same debate, Nikki Haley criticized all of the spending that was going on in Washington and how even Republicans, she was like, oh, I'm going to call it Republicans too. They voted to increase things. And then in the next sentence says, well, we only spend 3.5% of our GDP on Ukraine. And it's like, okay, so which one is it, right? So let's not pretend like, yeah, Vivek may not be perfect, but let's actually look at what he's running on and where he's running to, because if nothing else, it would be a great thing for that message to get across, right? And that's why he is my favorite, even if I disagree with him on a lot. You could also argue the same about Trump, right? Trump came in as this outsider, said he was going to do all these things, and then he kind of folded on a lot. He also flip-flopped on a ton from his past too, things like abortion and pro-life. And so, you know, you can't really judge and just say, oh, this political outsider's coming in, he's only conforming to what people want to hear, because that's literally what every single politician is doing in some way, shape, or form. All that being said, Matt's accurate. I think Vivek probably accomplished his goal, which was to make himself known to people who don't know him, because he's not an established name. I think he may have been a little bit irritating and grating in the way he did it. So for maybe the Karen voter, that may not be the swing he's going to get that he might need or hope to get. But I think it also did endear him to a lot of people. And so maybe from his perspective, it was a win. Okay, we'll move to our next one. This take comes from Chris Loesch, who says, DeSantis had the best mic drop, I think he means moment, of the night so far. Quote, I'm not going to send troops to Ukraine, but I am going to send them to the southern border. End quote. What do you think about that?
I mean, you're speaking of flip-flop in the last take. I mean, DeSantis has been... I mean, there's another moment in the debate that we'll get to, but it's these people are trying to wait till the looks on our faces change, essentially, for depending on their answer. And so DeSantis, I can't remember, it must have been 4 or 5 months ago, but had talked about like we need to have peace through strength sort of style action in Ukraine. It wasn't like super against putting not troops necessarily on the ground in Ukraine, but funding it and basically doing everything short of doing troops. And then when there was a bit of an uproar and he realized like, oh yeah, that's not very popular, he started to change his tune. But it was a little too late because we all have the internet now and everything lasts forever. So we all know that he, regardless if he's saying the right thing today, which is he's not going to send troops to the Ukraine, and regardless of whether or not you're going to send them to the southern border, like whether you think that's right or wrong, like he doesn't actually believe this, or it's not clear that he actually believes this outside of or in as much as he wants to say it to just make us like him.
Well, and yeah, I think that's completely correct.
It's not a mic drop moment either, dude. Like it's no. This is not a mic drop moment. Is when you like totally destroys Tulsi Gabbard destroying Kamala. A mic drop moment.
Yes,
this
exactly.
is not one of those.
Yeah, no, and you can see it even by the way the way that this was presented was, I think it was a raise your hand moment question where it said raise your hand if you would not, or if you would stop funding the war in Ukraine, something like that. And Vivek raised his hand. No one else did. And then DeSantis didn't actually raise his hand. He just started talking. He just kind of took it. It wasn't like a question directed to him. And the interesting thing was he said things like, well, Europe is going to is not paying their fair share, and we're going to make sure that Europe pays their fair share. He never said that he would stop funding Ukraine. So he's really trying to play both sides, right? He's trying to say, I'm not going to send our troops to Ukraine, but I'm essentially going to send troops in every single way except for sending troops, which is continuing funding. But I'm not going to tell you that I'm continuing funding. I'm just going to say Europe also needs to pay more, which is, also an insane premise, because even if it's technically better that Europe pays more rather than the US, more funding into Ukraine is still escalating a war. So the complete purpose of saying, oh, I'm not sending troops is defeated by saying, I want Europe to also pay more money into this war. So you're totally right in that he's flip-flopping. He's all over the place with that. And the other thing about this too, and I'm pretty sure Vivek also has this policy as well, sending troops to the southern border in some of the more aggressive tones that they've made actually sounds a little bit hostile. And frankly, like I don't think that the US would respond well if Mexico decided they were going to start sending troops to the border and start policing US citizens. I'm not saying that, if you have a border, you shouldn't maintain it. And the most generous interpretation of this is just saying sort of enforcing the law as it stands. But also some of the rhetoric on sending troops into the southern border just sounds really hawkish and aggressive and not cool. But you're totally right. It's not a mic drop moment. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think it's very difficult for DeSantis to have a mic drop moment based on his demeanor. That shouldn't matter, but it does. And the only person who thinks DeSantis has a mic drop moment are people who really like DeSantis already. Okay, we'll move on to someone who likes DeSantis already. Kurt Schlichter, who tweets, I don't think a guy who never served in our military needs to question the patriotism of the guy who actually did. And playing Call of Duty doesn't count, Vivek. And this is when he was talking in some of the clashes between Vivek and Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis, I believe. I can't remember if he was talking specifically about Pence or DeSantis.
DeSantis, I believe, was in the military. I know he was in the military.
So I think I was going to say, I think it may be DeSantis. Yeah, I think and I'm guessing that this was right after. I remember seeing this in the moment, but the debate was 2 hours, so I got lost. It was an early part. It may have been when Vivek said that I'm the only one on the stage not bought and paid for, which got a lot of boos because people really like it. We'll bring back the evergreen example of when you were talking and you got the comment about, oh, I just like seeing Bush, Obama, and Clinton all together. Right? Like, people like that idea, and even more so in a Republican primary. They love the Reagan's 11th commandment, the "Thou shalt not attack another fellow Republican." People love that, and so Vivek probably did himself harm by saying, "I'm the only one not bought and paid for." A little bit, probably, definitely boosted him with the Trumpian people, which is great. That's kind of his demographic anyway, but it definitely hurt him in that audience. And so I think that's what this is in response to. So all that being said, what do you think about Vivek being able to call out DeSantis because DeSantis served or not, or what have you?
One of the Republicans and conservatives hate the appeals to authority with Fauci, but
right.
The thing is, they do the exact opposite, and they've done it a lot longer in terms of appeal to authority in regards to the military. And it drives me nuts because they'll say things like, "Well, don't you never served in the military?" Or I'll have some, I don't want to be too clear about who this is, but this overweight, lazy person on welfare lecturing me about how I don't know what I'm talking about because I never served in the military, and this guy just drove trucks over in Europe, for a couple summers. Essentially, that was the extent of his service. So, these people will lecture you because the military state has tried to push this propaganda that if you wear a uniform and you have some sort of distinction or ranking, that makes you suddenly able to understand things that none of us can ever understand, even though you might have never even served in combat or served in areas or only done things that we all do normally as civilians all day long. So there's that aspect. And then the other aspect that really annoys me is that, like, okay, you can question the patriotism. Does Kurt Schlichter believe we can't question the patriotism of war criminals? Like, even if we accept that we were supposed to be in the Middle East, is it okay that we had people torturing people and moving outside of what our actual laws and standards are for warfare, robbing people, raping people, is it okay just because they're in the military doesn't mean we can't question their honor or question their ability to make good judgment calls? And even more so when it comes to someone running for public office, namely Ron DeSantis, who was a lawyer and was supposed to hold people accountable in Guantanamo Bay, which we didn't really hold people accountable very well in Guantanamo Bay. So, these guys will use this appeal to authority while also, decrying the appeal to authority of people saying, well, you need to trust the experts in Fauci and Birx and all these medical establishment people. Well, we don't need to necessarily trust the advice of a foreign policy military that has gotten us into war after war after war, has not won any of the wars that they've gotten us into. So, Vivek or Kurt Schlichter should engage with Vivek's criticisms, not just because he hasn't served or put on a uniform or anything like that.
Yeah. Oh, it's so funny because, of course, Kurt Schlichter, I don't know if Kurt Schlichter served. I don't think he did, but he may have. But the idea, I think he would recognize that there are some patriots, some people who he would respect and think their views are good and their insights are important and critical. There are people like that who didn't serve, but according to this line of logic, none of them should be able to criticize Rachel Levine because, you know what?
Yeah.
She apparently is correct. And so, hey, I don't know if I can value your opinion about whether or not the military should pay for trans surgeries or not, because this military person says so. And if you're not a military person, I don't think you can question anything they say. And that's the funny thing, too, is the idea that the only critique there was patriotism is really funny because Vivek never said you're not patriotic. He said, at worst, you're bought and paid for. And there's so many people bought and paid for as politicians. And just because he said that about Kurt Schlichter's guy, he's rushing to the defense because of that one facet, because he served. But Kurt Schlichter would recognize that there are so many politicians who served in the military who were bought and paid for. I mean, like, Kurt Schlichter's not like a George W. Bush guy. He would probably admit that Bush was somewhat paid for, but Bush served in the National Guard. So how come that somehow doesn't become the disqualifying thing? So it's a completely goofy, ridiculous way to judge things. And I think with the sort of the rise of the outsider, this type of reverence is slowly fading, and that's a good thing. You're going to see some examples, and we're going to go through some takes where they reference these, especially our last one. We're going to see some takes where they appeal to these platitudes or they appeal to authority in that way. But I think those are landing less and less, and people are more and more realizing, like, look, we don't live in an era where the biggest issue is whether or not someone respected Reagan or whether or not someone saluted the flag.
Yeah.
Like, they're trying to take my children and butcher them. They're trying to inflate the dollar to the point where I can't afford groceries. And so the disruptive talk that actually addresses the needs of the everyday person is more and more landing. And these things like, how dare you insult someone who served in the military, is not. And again, I respect people who have the courage of their conviction to do something that is sacrificial. Whether or not that's done through the right channel of the military is another matter. But like,
sure,
that's fine. And you can respect people for that. But that doesn't make you automatically immune from criticism, in particular when you're the governor of a state and you have mega donors around you and you've changed your tune on issues. That's just you're not insulated from that just because you served. It's like, I don't know, I've done nice things for family or for people I didn't know. That doesn't mean you can't call me out for being mean to someone because one time I helped, carry a bag of groceries for a lady crossing the street. That's not how that's not how criticism works.
Yep.
Okay, we've got a tweet from Andy McCarthy who says DeSantis and Christie would beat Biden and Harris by 10 points. What do you think?
No, I mean, this might be true if you factor in Trump never having been in existence. That right. Might be true. So, go back in the timeline and wipe Trump from ever becoming president, and then keep everything else the same of the past few years. So if everything was different, then yes, it would be different. To quote Sam Harris. No, this is absolutely not the case. The people that Trump is polling in the Republican primary, somewhere between like 51 to 60%. Right. He literally has more points on his polls than all of the other candidates combined, like literally. Right. And then you put in the fact that Chris Christie's got like 3% or something like that, and DeSantis is barely polling above Ramaswamy.
And not even in some.
Yeah, not even in some. Like Ramaswamy's in second in some. So it's like, yeah, there's no way these guys beat that. They're not going to, just because you got an R by your name, and this is what all the establishment has forgotten or failed to learn, I should say, because they never knew it in the first place, is that just because you have an R by your name doesn't guarantee you're going to get the vote. They don't know why people voted for Trump. They don't know why he is the sitting president with the most votes of any sitting president in history. They don't get that. They don't understand the populist movement. Those people are not going to vote for DeSantis and Christie, especially Christie. DeSantis is a little bit better and he could carry a little bit more of that vote, but he still reeks of establishment. And unfortunately for him, maybe fortunately for us, because he's revealed his hand, he thought, I'm going to campaign as the establishment candidate. It's like, did you learn nothing from the Trump, the phenomenon of the Trump administration? That's the exact opposite of what you want to do. So yeah, these guys they might be able to beat Biden and Harris, but it's not going to be like a red wave of 10 points, across the board. I don't think a Republican has won the popular vote for a long time. It's been a long time since we've won any sort of popular vote. So these guys aren't going to do it. The only one that could maybe get close to winning the election, not winning by 10 points, but just winning, is Trump.
Yeah, this is such an out of touch take. I think you're exactly right that if Trump didn't exist, this may have had some kind of efficacy. I don't really know. I feel like the problem is Chris Christie is he isn't an individual who has any shot at getting any kind of nomination. I mean, to the point where even when he allied himself with Trump, Trump didn't put him into a position of power because he didn't trust him, didn't like him, whatever it was. And Christie's entire shtick is, I'm going to firebomb someone else and I'm going to take us both down. You know, he did that with Marco Rubio. He tried to do it a little bit with Vivek. His campaign's been trying to do that to Trump, but he doesn't actually have likables. Like the most positives I see about Christie are the ones that I kind of express. And I am not a fan of Christie, but what Christie does well is he can tend to debate well and to target down people ruthlessly in a non-scripted manner. I think he does that really well. And I think that's actually a really valuable thing to have in a debate setting with a bunch of phonies, people repeating lines. The problem is he's completely wrong in his ideological positioning on basically everything. And so it's not always that helpful, but at least it's interesting. And that's the most positive thing I have to say, is not what he brings to the table in terms of as a leader or as an idea maker, but rather what he brings to the table to reflect on other people, right? No one's voting for Christie, even if you know, the things that they like about him exist, it's because he, you know, firebombed someone else. So Christie has high negatives. He was extremely unpopular in his state by the end of it. I think he had like an 8% approval rating or something wild by the end of his tenure in New Jersey. He brings way too many negatives. So just from a statistic standpoint alone, having Christie on your ticket is not a good thing.
No.
And the other thing is, of course, so Christie brings the anti-Trump movement, I guess. What does DeSantis bring? Oh, wait a minute. Donald Trump also has completely, you know, shot down DeSantis as not viewing him favorably. So the Trumpies are never going to go to DeSantis. So you're polling people who are going to be from similar demographics already, which is a terrible politically strategic move. So I think this is completely out of touch with reality. And I think you're right in that the Trump people will not really ever go for anyone other than Trump unless they are like explicitly told by him,
yes,
or explicitly prevented from. You know, like if Trump
they might not go for anyone
killed,
then if he gets prevented.
Exactly. Well, I was going to say, even if he was shot and killed, there's like a high percentage that would write his name in anyway. You know, for good or ill, it is kind of culty in many ways. But that just changes the political landscape and the political reality, whether you like it or not. I think this guy's still living in like 2012, maybe.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, Brit's favorite pollster, Frank Luntz, tweets, Nikki Haley may have just won the hashtag GOP debate with that foreign policy exchange. She has destroyed Vivek. One insightful comment I saw on this before I hand it over to you is that whatever Frank Luntz thinks, the GOP base thinks the opposite.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, I guess we could leave it at that, you know, in some ways. Yeah, so this is, I wasn't able to watch the entire debate, and so Donnie was gracious enough to give me the timestamp for this so I could review it. But basically, the exchange for this came by where they were asking about Ukraine, whether they need to put boots on the ground or not. Vivek and Mike Pence were going at it, and then they asked Nikki Haley because, you know, she's got the most experience out of everyone, and that's where you mentioned it earlier. She mentioned, oh, well, we only give 3.5% of our budget to, you know, funding Ukraine. It's like 3.5%, man. Like, for a country that, you know, we shouldn't even be giving a single iota of a percentage to because it's not our war. And it's like these people will say things like, oh, we're not at war with Russia, or we're not doing, like, Ukraine is a bulwark against them, and we need to, if we lose there, you know. And so they like conflate all these different terms. I even get confused talking about it because they're saying, well, we're not at war with Russia, but if we lose in Ukraine, that means Russia, it's bad for us, and so therefore we need to fund Ukraine with 3.5% of our budget, which I don't even, what at our peak was our percentage of our federal budget for like Afghanistan. It must have been around that. It's like, well, we were in war in Afghanistan. So what is the difference here? Is it only a difference of money? You know, to quote the great Gatsby, the only difference between me and you is that you have a lot of money and I have a lot of money, but that's the only things that are similar about us. So yeah, I totally botched that quote, but it's okay. I'll watch that. But yeah, these, like, Nikki Haley won that for Nikki Haley in her own mind and maybe in Frank Luntz's mind, but not for any of the Republican grassroots support, which they're just like, don't want to be in Ukraine. Everyone in the Republican side doesn't want to be there. And and even if it's only because Biden wants to be there, the Republican base is just like, nope, we're not going to do it. For whether for good reasons or for bad, the majority of Republicans don't support being there. And so I don't know why she's sticking on that, but she is, maybe because she gets some sort of paycheck from Raytheon.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that this is the complete disconnect that the politicians have. There is probably a decent portion of some Republican base that does want to fund Ukraine, but the vast majority have been turned against it and they're tired of it. And I think that all of this is exemplified actually in Mike Pence's remarks prior when he's talking with Vivek. I saw a tweet. I almost threw it in here. I forgot at the last moment, but it was something along the lines of, get you a woman who looks at you the way that Mike Pence looks at Ukraine when he's talking about funding them. And like, there's this whole spiel. I don't know if it was in the clip I sent you. I don't remember, but there's this whole thing where Mike Pence talks about going to Ukraine and all of the heartbreaking tragedy things he's seen. And
that's Chris Christie also says some stuff about that, and it's just
yeah, maybe it was Chris Christie, but I think Pence may have also said something along that because Vivek called everyone out for going to Kiev and seeing their Pope Zelensky, which I thought was a hilarious line. But he anyway, so he's talking about all these tragedies, and I think that the average person and the average human in who's not plugged in politically, especially, they don't care about what's going on in Ukraine. And that's not to say we shouldn't care about tragedy in general, but it is to say that you do have a hierarchy of priorities, right? Like, I first and foremost have a duty to my wife. I then first and foremost have a duty to my family, then to my friends and to my church and to my local city and community, then to my country. These obligations of things that we should care about do ascend. And so, yeah, we should care about heartbreaking things going on in Ukraine, but also we should recognize that getting involved, one, puts us in a place that's not safe, and two, it seems like even if you're arguing you would do both things at the same time, the way that the politicians talk about it, it makes it seem like they care all about Ukraine and do not care about the people at home. And so that is where the disconnect comes, I think, from the political class and the average people. So when Frank Luntz says, "Oh, Nikki Haley may have just won," he's talking about from this political class perspective. He's not talking about what the everyday person cares about. All she did was yell at him saying, "You have no experience." And he kind of said it kind of got lost in the chatter of the debate. But he had two really great lines. One, he said, I hope you're looking forward to your future career as a lobbyist with, Raytheon. And that was just a hilarious line that he threw that in. It was very Trump-esque.
And now she can never go do it.
Yeah, exactly. Lockheed.
She will. She will.
Yeah, she will. Totally. And then, but then he also said, when she said, you have no experience. He said, yeah, I don't have experience. I wouldn't want the experience that you have destroying nations. He said something along those lines.
And that's so good.
And it got drowned out. And so the frustrating thing to me was in this exchange, in the short-term window, I think strategically she may have won. And from a very limited perspective, if you go in totally blank, you might think she wins because I don't think Vivek had the full time to explain his position. And when your position is like peace through strength, like Mike Pence said, or you have no experience, people shortcut to that really quickly, like as if that's a qualifying thing. It's the same emphasis as what I was complaining about on the last episode when people say, well, we need to do something. It's like people just think having a thing on your resume is automatically better than not. And it's like, no, Nikki Haley's foreign policy credentials or anyone else's credentials, the only benefits have been from abstaining from intervention. All of their history and all of their credentials are of destroying nations, of regime change, of leaving things worse than they found them. So in the short, if you just say, oh, you have no experience and you're naive, you might come off looking like you won in the moment because you're getting, Vivek's getting like trounced from all sides. But in reality, when you look at the resume of things, no, he's absolutely right that he wouldn't want the experience they have because it's an experience of disaster.
Yeah.
All right. Jack Pasoybic says, 0 questions on election integrity, 0 questions on ballot operations. the questions sucked. What do you think?
My wife and I turned on the debate last night and tried to get through a bit of it, and she literally said, she's like, these questions are just don't make any sense. They literally opened with, a music video for Richmond, north of Richmond, which I really liked the song, but like, what a weird moment to capitalize on. And she's like, yeah, these questions make no sense, and they prompt answers that make no sense from basically everyone. I was like, yep, you're totally right. That's how it's always been. But there's a reason why the questions are structured the way they are. It's because there is an establishment, and the establishment is interested in upholding itself. Therefore, they're never going to ask anything that could potentially prompt questioning or shake the foundations of what they've got in place right now. So to question that the elections may not have had full integrity behind them, that there might have been some weird stuff going on, or that maybe that there's a way to kind of game the elections, or as Time Magazine put it, have a shadow campaign to get people elected through different ballot harvesting operations and things like that. If those ever got brought up into the public, sphere of mind, it would severely limit their ability to maintain their, air of legitimacy. And that's all that government is. It's that you've got this violent mob that we have granted legitimacy, or at least the perception of legitimacy to. What's amazing about the past 5-6 years with Donald Trump is that a lot of that has been chipped away at, or it's being chipped away at pretty actively. And, it doesn't take that big of a percentage of the population to not believe in the legitimacy of the government and believe in the legitimacy of these literal monsters that want to get people killed in foreign countries, want to take as much as your income. They want to lock you in your house. They want to stick you with all sorts of vaccinations. These people get away with as much as they possibly could. They only go as far as much as you grant them the perception of legitimacy. And so anything that chips away at that, everyone from most of the candidates, 7 out of 8 of the candidates on the debate stage to the debate moderators are part of that. And they're going to do their best to uphold it.
It's funny because I'm not sure that I initially would think that those kinds of questions would be what I'm looking for. But when you think about it, you're right in that there's even something to be said, like, do you believe that their election integrity is a problem? If you don't, then like explain why you think things are secure, or call out the people who you do. And if you do, what is your plan to, let's say you're the nominee. If you think this election fraud's a thing and they unseated a sitting president, what's your plan to combat that then? And those things I think people actually would care about. But the other thing is, like, the pressing questions that to me just were not refuted or talked about in some way, shape, or form is, there's murmurings of more COVID regulations coming in the fall, which I think there's going to be a vast portion of the population that will just not comply this time. Great. I hope so. I hope those things get shooed and pushed back from where they came. But that to me is like one of those questions where it's like, that's kind of relevant, asking like, hey, if you are elected president, can you commit to not locking down the country in one of the most disastrous moves? And what is your plan to hold people accountable who did suggest that and who did? Because the last outsider we had kept the architect of the whole thing in power the whole time. He ran re-election ads being praised by Fauci. So, do you view this as a good thing? What's your opinion? None of that was brought up. So I do think that these questions could have been better, and we're definitely tried to curve away from some of the more controversial issues that Fox might be scared of bringing up.
This to kind of hammer a little bit more on this, the way they frame questions to even ones that they are okay with asking is disingenuous. Like, I was thinking about how, like, there's the old internet joke of, which is your favorite pie, between blueberry and apple pie, like, why would you eat blueberry pie? And
yeah.
That whole, like, where it's like they already just granted that it's like you're going to choose blueberry pie, and why is it your favorite? Yep. And it's like that's how they phrase these questions, where it's like, oh, well, Ukraine is a big sticking point with everyone. Tell me your exact military strategy for going in there and fixing it. It's like, well, you've left out the entire opposite half of the question, which is like, maybe we shouldn't be in there in the first place. Like, should we be doing anything there? And so, like, yeah, so they never want to, the fact that they won't bring up these questions, which, at least a big segment of their audience at Fox would have questions about, or would be interested in hearing the candidates, even if they're going to toe the party line, which is elections are 100%, with integrity, and we are not going to do any sort of dishonest ballot operations or anything like that. We believe we can win by convincing people. Even if everyone said that, they don't want that in the sphere of people's mind share, because the second people start thinking about it or you even present it, like there's a chance and a threat towards the establishment.
That's absolutely right. All right, our next take comes from Schlichter. And I'm sorry if there's so many takes and people are tired about hearing about Vivek, but if you watch the debate, you know that
he made it about him. That's the first take that you put up there was Vivek successfully made the debate about him. So
exactly, and it was very, very true. So, so Kurt Schlichter again. He says Vivek probably shouldn't have reminded us that he was born when most of us were partying in college or beyond. He says a lot of interesting things and a lot of stupid things. He should go away for 10 years and then try again. Hashtag GOP debate. This to me is interesting because Schlichter was a big Trump guy, but now he's a DeSantis guy. So what do you think? What do you make of this take? And what do you make specifically? I think of the age thing at the beginning. I think that's
it's how old is Vivek? He's
38.
Yeah, he's not that much younger than DeSantis, you know? Like, I think DeSantis is like 43 or 45 or something like that. So, you know, it's about 5 to 6 years. They might have had the same, depending on if he graduated high school early or something like that. They might have been in the same class potentially. And Vivek has a wealth of more experience in actually producing things than Ron DeSantis has. Ron DeSantis has been an employee of the government for longer than most, you and I at least, have been in the working world. Vivek has scaled businesses to billions of dollars. So it's yeah, who cares? It's not a matter of who's older or not. You know, it's Vivek is arguably more impressive than maybe anyone on that stage in a lot of ways in terms of the actual value that he's brought in and produced. And I just find it funny that he could say, Kurt Schlichter says, oh, he says a lot of interesting things and a lot of stupid things. Well, give me what is stupid about what he said. That's something you and I can actually engage with. We can't engage with him just saying oh yeah, he's too young. He's 6 years younger than my favorite candidate who already is considered young. You know, I guess 38 is considered young if you really like politicians being in their 80s or 90s, you know, when they're in there. But I don't know. It used to not be a thing that was how it was supposed to go. It used to be oh yeah, we want someone that's of sound mind and able body because that kind of affects how they're going to be able to function and do the job.
Yeah, I find it very, very fascinating that I've seen this kind of across the board from a lot of places, a lot of boomers and Gen Xers in particular, that they seem to be just filled with vitriol against millennials and younger people, particularly conservatives, because the idea of, like you said, him being not that much younger from DeSantis, it's really funny because we're talking about, oh, you know, DeSantis is young and he's chic and he'll bring that energy that we need. And then as soon as it's, you know, on Vivek, he's like, oh, he shouldn't remind us that he was born when we're partying. It just feels really bitter. This idea,
yeah.
Oh, he's too young. He doesn't have the right things. And go ahead.
He was born when most of you were partying in college or beyond. But when he was in college and he would have been partying at your age, he was starting a business. So it's oh yeah, this guy's obviously more advanced than you. You know, he's right. Way ahead of what your track of life was.
Yeah. And then he says a lot of interesting things and a lot of stupid things. That was Trump. So I don't get it from someone who's very pro-Trump. Trump says a lot of stupid things, and I think Schlichter recognizes that. He should go away for 10 years and then try again. Completely arbitrary, right? Go away for 10 years also implies that he wouldn't come back with more political experience. So what's the right amount of experience that you need? Should it be someone who just has good ideas and has good intuition, or should it be someone who just has something on their resume? You just have to go do something. But to the first point again, this idea that Vivek probably shouldn't have reminded us he was born when most of us were partying in college or whatever. This sentiment was so intensely felt when Mike Pence was interacting with Vivek. Mike Pence had it out for Vivek. He unprompted would attack him multiple times throughout the whole night. And part of the things he said were things like, we don't maybe Christie said, we don't need this amateur or something like that. Mike Pence said, it's not time to learn on the job. Mike Pence said something about, you don't have the proper credentials or experience or whatever. I don't remember all of it exactly, but it particularly came from Pence. And my theory on this, my thought is that Pence is deeply, deeply unsettled in the same way that Hillary Clinton was in 2008 with Obama, that he's done all the right things. He was a congressman, he was a governor of a state, and then he was a vice president. And it's his turn. Exactly. It's his turn. He's old enough for it. He's done all the right steps. And now this young guy who has no experience is polling higher than him. And that is just the height of he's just so taken aback and angry and offended and miffed, and you just feel slighted. Like this was his to inherit. God told him he was going to be president. I think I don't know if that's an actual quote or if people have just kind of implied that, but I remember hearing back in when he was picked as the VP that he really did have presidential aspirations for a long time, because I think people said that God said he said that God told him he was going to be president. I don't know if that's true, not verified, but he acts like that anyway. Like that's how he comes across.
Well, and sorry, go for it.
Oh yeah, well, I was just gonna say, and the last thing to me is that if your entire problem with someone is that, oh, I'm bitter that he's younger than me and more accomplished and pulling higher, like that should impress you. And I get that it's hard to let that go, but it's weird for someone like Kurt Schlichter, who's maybe only mad that he's pulling like about as high as DeSantis, but it's weird for you to have a personal stake in that. For someone like Pence, it makes sense, but it's also not the right approach and not the right attitude to have.
What always gets me about these guys that will claim credentials and experience, and they'll say that on one hand, and then the very next moment they'll say, we have never done anything good about this. It's been a problem for so long. And it's like, yeah, you were part of that. You were part of that. All the stuff that you're complaining about has been stuff that you have let go for the decades that you've been in office and in power and had the ability to change stuff. I mean, when Donald Trump hit Joe Biden with that in the 2020 debates, it was amazing. Like, I was like, yeah, that's so true. Like, this guy is talking about these problems. We have systemic racism. We have this issue and that issue, and we're not doing anything about it. And Trump's just like, yeah, you were in there for 50 years, Joe. Like, what did you do during that? It's like, it's so true. These guys want it both ways. They want to be in power. They want to leverage their credentials and say, we know what we're doing. But then they also want to criticize and say, we're on the wrong path, and I know how to get us back on it. Well, you haven't gotten us back on it in the decades you've been in office. So what makes me think that you're going to do it, any better now that we just give you our vote?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it's very funny because there were moments like that throughout the debate with other people, like when they're talking about the national debt, and it's like, well, you were a senator, Tim Scott. Why didn't you, stop that? And he kind of didn't have a response for that. And that's the advantage of being an outsider. And again, something I think Schlichter should appreciate. All right, our next take comes from Chloe Cole, and she tweets, Asa Hutchinson talking about Trump being morally disqualified while also continuing to stand by his decision to veto age restrictions on medical transition. Now I threw this one in there because I felt bad. I felt like, man, poor Doug Burgum, poor Asa Hutchinson, they were on the stage too. Maybe we should throw them a bone. But I mean, frankly, Doug Burgum looked like the nice little like neighborhood guy who got lost and wandered on the stage and is a friendly dude, but does not belong there. And Asa Hutchinson, I mean, I don't know why he was on there. These beady eyes, and
my wife was like, "Who is that?"
Oh yeah,
like, yeah, that's what we're all thinking.
Yeah, I mean, like he looked terrible. Like he didn't even have, his jawline was weird. His bald head, he had like rheumatoid nodes for eyes. I mean, he was just bizarre looking. He didn't command presence. He didn't do anything right. The only thing that was notable about him is that he didn't raise his hand when they asked if all of the candidates would still support a President Trump if he was going to be the nominee or whatever. And so he made a big showing about being morally qualified or disqualified or whatever. And it was a big moment. And I think that Chloe Cole just highlights the absolute inanity of that kind of remark and that kind of statement to say, okay, so you're going to talk about Trump being morally disqualified while you actively didn't stop, people from butchering children. And that to me is really funny. That shows, again, to me, the level of disconnect that people have with the political class and what they think, matters. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
This is a great take. It's definitely true. I can't believe no one told Asa Hutchinson, like, hey, don't don't go try and going after Trump about being morally disqualified. Like, we settled whether or not that actually matters to the American people back in 2016 when the Hollywood Access tape came out. Like, I thought at that moment, I was like, oh, it's over. Because I was still operating under the belief that, like, oh yeah, if you go talk about people like that and you have some hidden Mike moment that is bad, like, it's over. And then he won, and I was like, okay, like, these rules do not apply to Trump. He's a freaking mud monster. He's a mud monster. And if you ever try to attack him, all you're going to succeed in doing is getting mud on you. You're not going to make him look any dirtier, because no one cares that he's dirty. They only care that he says things that make the establishment quake in their boots and tremble with rage. And so I think that's a good aspect of it. I think that's true. And then the other side of it is that, what would Asa Hutchinson say is morally disqualifying about Trump? And if you ask anyone with a harsh stance against Trump, to say, well, he said this or he said that, or he pulled us out of the Paris climate change accords or things like that, and then you say, well, do you think doing an embargo and blockade and funding genocide in Yemen would be something that morally disqualifies from being president? Would starving 500,000 Iraqi children be something that disqualifies someone from being president? And it's like, oh, okay. In that perspective, basically no one of the past 50 years, past 100 years is morally qualified to be president. Trump didn't do, well, he did stuff with the Yemen deal. He didn't end it, at least, like he should have. But it's like, yeah, so on that plane, we all raced ahead, got to the red light. We're all stopped. It doesn't matter how fast you got there. Everyone is equally morally disqualified because you've killed 500,000 people somewhere. Or the decisions you made have led to that, and you didn't care, and you tried to hide it and sweep it under the rug and play it off and morally justify it. So none of the establishment has any right to question or disqualify Trump on moral grounds. I mean, the only person that maybe could do that is someone like a Rand Paul or Ron Paul, or someone that has actually been against these sort of things. But good luck getting far with the establishment and the deep state if you hold those perspectives.
Absolutely right. I couldn't put it better myself. Okay, that's enough time on Asa Hutchinson.
Okay, all right.
Let's just put him to bed. He got lost. He needs nap time or something. Okay, and this is the last take, and this is I think one of the most important points in the debate, one of the most important clashes of ideas that is not being talked about enough. And I think people who see it recognize it, and for the people who I've seen talk about it, really recognize this was important. But it gets overlooked by things like Chris Christie saying, "Oh, Vivek sounds like a guy who talks like Chat GPT." Like, oh, good one. Or Haley.
He doesn't even know what Chat GPT is.
Well, he might use Chat GPT to tell him where the nearest closed beach is that he can occupy or something. Yeah. But so anyway, but people who see this moment really do recognize that this is the important moment. I think, at least, this to me is the moment of the debate. So the quotes back and forth, Pence to Vivek. So well, to give context before this quote, because this isn't the whole exchange, but Vivek basically said that, we've been, as an American people, we've been drifting apart. We've lost a national identity, and we need to be reminded of things that we value in together and treasure together as a national identity that unifies. Okay? This was Mike Pence. We're not looking for a new national identity. We just need government as good as our people, Pence hits Vivek. Ramaswamy hits back. It's not morning in America. Pence steamrolled with answers, which many suffering Pence reporters over the years all know about. According to an R source, Pence just destroyed the game show host, Vivek. That's kind of the summary of it. I might just add a little bit more context. Basically, you went back and forth saying, you're confusing the American people with the government. The people are good and have this strong identity. And then Vivek said, look, like, I don't know what world you're living in, but it's not morning in America. It's a dark time, and people are divided, and they need to come together. So that was kind of the full-fledged exchange. So what do you think? Did Pence destroy the game show host, or
no.
Did Vivek live on?
No, I mean, I like you were talking about earlier with the Nikki Haley thing. Maybe he did from a strategic standpoint, but in my eyes, he did not. And I really appreciated this because he literally said what I've always wanted to say to these weird one-liners that presidential candidates use in debates. That we just need a government as good as our people. And Ramaswamy literally said, like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. It's like you and me both, dude. Like that means nothing to me. Like what a weird one-liner that sounds a little bit awesome, but is not actually awesome. These Pence believes that if he returns to the Reagan Morning in America era, that somehow he can win. But newsflash, that was 40, 50 years ago now. We are not obviously the same people. And Ramaswamy was being asked, if I recall correctly, about like guns or crime or something like that, and saying like we need a new national identity. Like we do not hold ourselves to moral standards. And Pence was like, no, like we're the most faith-loving, most good people on the planet. We just need a government as good as our people. It's like, Pence, have you been out on the street? Like, come walk around Seattle, go walk around San Francisco, go walk around any of the top 5, top 10 most populous cities in the United States, and tell me that that gives off the vibe of the most faith-fueled people, in the world. And it's like, okay, and you claim that we're headed down the wrong track, that Joe Biden is leading us there, that he's doing a terrible job and he's morally bankrupt and all these things. It's like, yeah, and 81 million people voted for him.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't like, what a weird doublespeak moment. Like, this guy will say anything to be in power. And like you were saying earlier, he's got the Hillary Clinton syndrome, and he's going to lose because you can't have that syndrome and win. Oh, it's my turn and I deserve it. It's like, nope, you are going to get steamrolled, Mike Pence, by the harsh reality that is, we don't like you anymore. No one likes you anymore. And the best thing you could do is to not pretend to not be yourself, pretend to be someone else, pretend to be an outsider. But instead he's doubling down on, as Barack Obama put it, the 1960s and 70s called back for their foreign policy. The 1980s called back, for your presidential campaign strategy. It's not going to work.
Yeah, and this to me is where the pre-canned lines versus the stark reality is important, because to me, when Pence said all that he said about, we need a government as good as our people, and that you're confusing them, and that our people are the most, that to me felt like the most artificially churned out trash that is so disingenuous and so just like, this doesn't mean anything. You can just say this and there's no bearing or weight to it. It doesn't acknowledge any reality. It would have even been better. Like the funny thing is, I think Michael Malice would make Pence's case better for him to play devil's advocate. Michael Malice would have said things like, no, we saw the fall of the USSR without shooting a bullet. The US has, gives more charitably to impoverished people and to people abroad than any other nation. You could make these arguments, but he didn't. He just said all these really bland, generic things. And the problem is that while some of those, positives about America and Americans, track record of history being good, and generally speaking, Americans' ethos being okay and good, it doesn't acknowledge the overwhelming sense of dread that the average American every day feels. When you talk about things like Bidenomics is failing, and yet you're saying that we don't have a national, problem with this, that we're in the morning in America. It's not a dark time. Your cognitive dissonance is just out the wazoo, because you can sit there, you can say, oh, Bidenomics is failing the average person, and then completely fail to connect with the average person actually being affected by high grocery prices, actually being affected by high food prices, wondering if they're going to be able to make it to the next week because of their paycheck to paycheck lifestyle, because rents are so high. Like, there's no conception of that in this political class establishment, because they've been taken care of for so long. They have nothing to worry about there. It's just like how generally conservative people who would hypothetically support free market housing policies, once they have a home and they're not looking to buy, they don't care about the housing crisis. They don't think about it. They don't concern it. That's just the young people's problem. As long as my property value keeps going up, I'm great. And that's what it feels like when Pence goes in saying things like, no, we just need the government as good as its people. It's like, no, what Vivek is identifying is this Sehnsucht, this great longing for purpose and identity that it resides in Americans, because we are not a faith-filled people, because the people who are agnostic or atheistic don't even have that national identity, that greater purpose to latch onto. And it's what has made our youth and our young people feel so aimless and wandering and trying to fill their lives with sensory immediate gratification pleasure, instead of building for a long-term goal or achievement. And so the fact that Pence was so dismissive about this, I think, highlighted everything you needed to know. That Vivek could be the biggest phony in the world. He could be the biggest hypocrite in the world. And yet him acknowledging that means that his policies would at least have a chance at being effective. Whereas everyone else on that stage has no idea what will actually be the sort of the solution that Americans would need in a president.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I don't have any more to add, man. That was good.
All right. Well, and the last one I'll take in, because I just thought of it, was I saw Chris Christie got asked about UFOs, and one of my favorite tweets from the night I saw was Chris Christie got asked about UFOs, as we all know he'd be the president in the movies who tried to hunt down ET.
Oh, I like it.
I'm not an ET fan, but that made me laugh.
Yeah,
all right,
good.
well, that's the episode for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let us know if you want more rapid fire takes on this. We'll probably do it for all the primary debates, because I am somewhat of a masochist when it comes to these things, and I do enjoy watching them. If you haven't seen it for yourself, I wouldn't necessarily sit through the whole thing, but look up some of the highlights, some of the good clips, like Chris Christie being booed for a solid 30 seconds trying to talk, and the audience just doesn't let him. I mean, I probably gained like an extra year of life from that 30 seconds alone. So check it out if you want. But in the meantime, give us a like, give us a comment, give us suggestions of takes that you want us to critique, and we'll catch you on the next one.